100% tariffs, and China said, "We don't care." And I want you to picture exactly what happened in the moments before this became a news story. A Japanese tanker crossed the Strait of Hormuz, Japan, America's closest Pacific ally for 80 years, and it paid for passage in Chinese yuan, not dollars yuan. That one decision made by one crew on one vessel in one narrow stretch of water contains more information about the state of American power than any press briefing you will hear this week. Here's what we know, and here's how we got here. Over the past 60 days, the United States constructed a naval blockade around Iran, spending an estimated $20 billion in deploying its most extreme financial weapon: 100% tariffs on Chinese goods. The strategy was built on a single theory: pressure China, watch China blink, watch Iran collapse. The Wall Street Journal and S&P Global data confirm what followed. That theory failed. Washington issued the tariff threat publicly: 100%, a levy equal to the full price of every Chinese product entering the American market. This is not a routine trade measure. This is the most extreme financial threat Washington can issue, short of a formal declaration of economic war. The message was clear. Beijing must choose between Iranian oil and American commerce. Choose wrong, and the cost is catastrophic. China received that message. China read it. And China issued a formal government statement on the record, in public, in front of every finance ministry and trade division watching this conflict from Ankara to Jakarta. 3 words: we don't care. Not through a back channel, not quietly, publicly. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story, because the audience for that statement was never Washington. The audience was every middle power on earth that has been yielding to American economic pressure out of habit rather than genuine necessity. Every finance ministry that received those 3 words ran the same calculation at the same moment. If Beijing can absorb 100% tariffs, it's the most devastating economic weapon in Washington's arsenal, and simply continue buying Iranian oil, then what does American pressure actually mean for a smaller country that has been complying out of fear rather than conviction? The answer that calculation produces is quietly devastating. It means the threats are less credible than they appeared, and less credible threats produce, in the aggregate, less compliant behavior. Not with a formal announcement. In 100 quiet decisions by governments that used to automatically yield and are now pausing to ask whether they need to, China's 3 words did not just protect Iran's oil revenue. They lowered the global credibility of American economic coercion for every country watching. Now, let me give you the Japanese tanker, because this is not a navigation story. This is a monetary history story. The implications reach further than almost anyone covering this conflict has acknowledged. Japan is the world's 3rd largest economy. Japan has been among America's closest strategic partners for 80 years. It is embedded inside the American security and financial architecture more comprehensively than almost any other nation on earth, and a Japanese tanker paid Iran in yuan, not because Tokyo has abandoned Washington, not because Japanese policymakers have converted to any anti-American ideology, because that is what accessing energy through that waterway now practically requires. Japan did not make an ideological statement. It made an operational decision driven entirely by physical reality. To understand why that matters, you need to understand what the petrodollar system actually is. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in American dollars in exchange for American security guarantees. That arrangement became one of the most durable foundations of American financial power. Because energy is priced in dollars, every country on earth needs dollars to obtain it. That constant global demand keeps American borrowing costs low. It keeps the global financial architecture oriented around American institutions and American priorities. French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing famously called this the exorbitant privilege. Japan paying in yuan to cross the strait is one of America's closest allies, making a financial decision that bypasses that system. Not by choice, by operational requirement. Harvard professor and former IMF chief economist Kenneth Rogoff framed the stakes with precision. Iran is dead serious about preferring yuan to avoid American sanctions and to cultivate its ally China, which has been moving steadily to redenominate its own trade and that of the BRICS nations into yuan. What Iran has done, with a sophistication that its adversaries persistently underestimate, is transform a military choke point into a financial instrument. The Strait of Hormuz is no longer simply a passage through which oil moves. It is a toll mechanism through which the petrodollar system erodes. One payment, one tanker, one precedent at a time. Iran's parliament was reportedly working to formalize this process. One lawmaker explained the logic simply. We provided security, and it is natural that ships and oil tankers should pay such fees. Observe what Iran has done here. America's blockade was designed to prevent Iran from accessing the waterway commercially. Iran inverted that logic entirely. It became the waterway's administrator, collecting revenue in its preferred currency from vessels that would rather pay than sit idle. The blockade attempted to make Iran powerless. Iran responded by becoming a toll booth operator. Now let me tell you what this actually means for real people. American gas prices are sitting at $4.46 per gallon and rising. Midterm elections are approaching. Every cent at the pump is a political cost that Iran's strategic planning was specifically designed to exploit. The blockade was constructed over 60 days and $20 billion, and the man on the highway in Ohio filling his tank this morning is absorbing part of that cost right now. It's not in policy language in dollars per gallon. Beyond the pump, the broader economic exposure matters. S&P Global data shows that only 3.7% of cross-border trade was settled in yuan in 2024, up from less than 1% in 2012. That trajectory was already moving before the first tanker paid Iran in yuan. What the Strait of Hormuz has done is accelerate that trajectory by forcing the question in a context where nations cannot afford ideological consistency. Energy security is not optional. Operational requirements normalize. As Professor Rogoff observed, that is how paradigms shift, not with a bang, with accumulated habit. Now let me give you the railway, because if the yuan payment reveals how Iran is restructuring the financial architecture of global energy trade, the railway reveals something more fundamental. It reveals that the physical infrastructure of that restructuring was constructed before the blockade, deliberately, with enough foresight to ensure that when the maritime choke point was finally contested, an overland alternative already existed and was ready to move product. The China to Iran rail corridor has been operational since approximately May 2025. It connects Tehran to Chinese cities, cutting transit time to roughly 12 to 15 days, compared to 30 to 40 days by sea. Pause on that date. The railway now being used to route Iranian oil around the American naval blockade was completed and operational 9 months before that blockade went into effect. It was not built in response to the crisis. It was built in anticipation of exactly this kind of crisis. According to the geopolitical consulting agency Special Eurasia, the railway helps mitigate the risks of naval interdiction by Western forces. The architecture runs through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, the breadths of a continent, entering China through corridors that no American naval vessel can interdict, monitor, or pressure. The blockade controls maritime access, has no mechanism for stopping trains. Pakistan opened 6 new border crossings to transport Iran-bound goods. Turkey's strategic interests require helping Tehran mitigate the blockade. Iran's Food Industry Association confirmed that Tehran has activated the Caspian Sea route and northern land and rail routes as alternatives to the strait. What is being described here is not improvisation. It is a strategy of systemic resilience. The deliberate construction over years of redundant pathways for trade and energy movement, each one less susceptible to American maritime pressure than the last. The United States designed a blockade against a nation. It discovered that nation was embedded inside a web of regional interdependencies, economic, strategic, and geographic, that could not all be simultaneously severed. Step back for a moment, because the bigger picture here matters. The structural truth that no press conference will acknowledge is this: systems are harder to undo than policies. The yuan payment infrastructure now established in the Strait of Hormuz will be there after any ceasefire. The railway connecting Tehran to Chinese cities will be there after any deal. China's public declaration that it will continue purchasing Iranian oil regardless of American tariff threats is now on the record and cannot be retracted without Beijing absorbing a loss of credibility that would cost it far more than the tariffs themselves. The pattern here appears to show, and analysts note this consistently, that each of these 3 elements was designed not to manage a crisis, but to establish a permanent alternative to the American-controlled system. And notably, as of this broadcast, no official from the administration has offered a substantive public response to the railway confirmation. the yuan payment, or the meaning of China's formal statement taken together, that silence tells us something. 3 scenarios define where this leads. Reporting suggests the first possibility is that American pressure accumulates faster than the alternative architecture can absorb it, and Iran accepts nuclear terms. A second scenario, which analysts note appears increasingly plausible, is that the alternative architecture stabilizes Iranian economics long enough to outlast American domestic political tolerance for rising gas prices and blockade costs. The third, and by some measure, the most consequential scenario, regardless of how the Iran conflict resolves, is that the yuan payment system, the railway, and China's public defiance together have already established the proof of concept that an alternative to dollar-dominated global trade is not a future aspiration. It is a present operational reality. What we are really deciding tonight is not a policy question. It is a question about who we are willing to leave behind. The family paying $4.46 per gallon, who has never heard of the petrodollar. The government that calculates for the first time that American threats cost more to obey than to defy. The allied nation that pays in yuan because its economy requires energy, and the waterway now demands it. These are not abstract forces. These are human decisions made by real people in real time. Drop A if you believe the blockade can still achieve its objectives before the alternative architecture reaches full capacity. Drop B if you believe the railway and yuan system have already made the blockade's original strategy obsolete. Drop C if you believe the long-term erosion of dollar dominance is the story here, and the Iran conflict is only the accelerant.